Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called Avatar: The Way of Water.
Return to Pandora. Set more than a decade after the events of the first film, learn the story of the Sully family. Jake, Neytiri, and their kids. The trouble that follows them. The lengths they go to keep each other safe. The battles they fight to stay alive, and the tragedies they endure. That's not really much of a plot synopsis. It's just like hype for the film, I think. But, man, Avatar 2, Avatar: The Way of Water. It's been 13 years in the making.
Roughly 13 years, yeah.
Like, there's so much going on, especially in the news cycles right now, just like the production of this movie. How long has it been filming for? How long do the special effects take place? How long did it take to write? Did they film number 2 and 3 back to back? They apparently filmed parts of number 4 already, but it's like, there's so much craziness going on with this. And James Cameron hasn't done a single movie since the first Avatar back in 2009. And that blew everyone's socks off. I mean, it was one of the largest grossing movies of all time. Avatar: Way of Water, I mean, it's charging forward at the box office. I don't know how far it goes, but
it's already now, it just surpassed Maverick Top Gun as the highest grossing movie of 2022. And that was, I think, after 6 weeks in theaters.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I think it's fair to say, like, the box office world has kind of changed since Avatar right now as well. Like, there's been a lot of billion-dollar movies. Like, it's almost become expected that movies pull in this much money. And that's just for like a regular movie, like Fast and the Furious. One of their random movies will make $1 billion at the box office. And this movie, I mean, it's taken at least half a decade to make the thing. And it's like, I don't know what the budget was for this film. I think it would probably be really difficult to actually say for sure.
Well, it's tough because, like you said, Cameron is filming multiple movies at once. I know for sure 2 and 3 he's filming at the same time, which is like, it's a crazy undertaking. And I think the last time they actually did this was like Lord of the Rings and I think the Matrix sequels were the last real, like the last time Hollywood, a studio had that much faith in a project that they put that much budget to multiple sequels filming at the same time. It's a little tough to tell how much specifically it costs to make The Way of Water, especially because they were developing new technologies in terms of like CGI and motion capture. So like that's kind of baked into that overall value as well. So like it becomes like it's a little bit murkier on the back end to understand how much it actually costs to make this like Avatar: The Way of Water specifically versus how much they're investing in the entire series of movies now, right?
Did you doubt James Cameron at all? Like in the past 10 years, you know, a Avatar sequel's coming. Do you doubt that's going to be one of the biggest movies ever made? Or do you think it's just going to like show up and flop and be awful?
Well, I was doubting that the Avatar sequels were ever going to get released, honestly.
Yeah.
Like after 13 years to have a sequel come out when they've been talking about it for so long. In terms of like, it's a weird conversation, all these conversations around like box office. Because I think the problem is people conflate box office and popularity with quality of a movie. But if you're just talking about betting on whether James Cameron is going to make a movie that's going to be successful, like a blockbuster action special effects extravaganza that's going to be successful, I think you don't bet against James Cameron. If you want a solid bet, look at his filmography. Look at, I mean, James Cameron was the one setting these records, the highest grossing movies of all time. It was Titanic first.
Yeah.
And then Avatar: The Way of Water. And then, not Avatar: The Way of Water, rather, Avatar, the first one when it came out. And I think Avatar actually retook the crown because it was re-released in anticipation of this movie. And so, like, I think Endgame or Infinity War was the highest grossing movie of all time. And then the baton was passed back to Avatar, adding the new box office. If you were to bet on whether James Cameron knows how to put together a movie that's going to pull back, to get back your return on investment and then some. Yeah, like you'd be crazy to bet against James Cameron at this point for whether you like his movies or not. this guy can tell stories that bring people in to the theater, whether it's through the narrative itself or whether it's just through the sheer spectacle now of the special effects and the worlds he's creating.
Yeah.
Whatever, like James Cameron has, he's found the secret. He knows what he's doing, and he can make a movie that is going to pull people in and make a bunch of money. Whether or not you think that movie's any good or not, that's another conversation. But like James Cameron, like it was not by accident when you get like one after the other, the Titanic and then Avatar, highest grossing movies ever made.
Yeah.
That's not by accident.
This guy knows what he's doing. And let's go back in time to 2009. Avatar is launching.
That's our time travel sound effects.
3D in movies is not really a thing at this time. Like there were 3D movies where you have like the red and blue lenses, cheap plastic, cardboard glasses.
And usually the third movie in the series, right? Friday the 13th, part 3, Jaws 3D.
Yeah. It was a big gimmick back in the 80s. And it really died out. And then to say, oh, James Cameron's coming in. He's going to do a movie in 3D. He's developed technology to do this movie in real 3D. And it was just like, what does that even mean? What is this actually going to look like? And going to the theater to see this in 3D for the first time, like the first movie, was like a holy experience. Like the 3D was amazing. There was true depth. And it was like, it wasn't about the gimmicky things flying out at the screen at you. It was like, no, I can actually focus my eyes in multiple planes and things are in focus. Things have depth. And it was crazy.
Done to enhance the story and the visual storytelling, and not just as a gimmick. You say, like, you look at some of those older films from the 80s, and they'll have things flying at the screen, and sure, the shark blows up and the teeth fly, and they're just floating in space in front of you. This one was a bit more subtle, whereas like giving the depth of field where it felt like you were watching like a 3D space, even though it's. Yeah, if you look at the articles, like it's not really 3D. You can't actually see images in 3D, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And we know all that, of course. But it just like, and one of the things with the 3D technology, the new technology is with the projection, I'm not sure all the technical stuff behind it, but I know that it tends to darken the image when you project it as a necessity. But somehow with both Avatar and Avatar Way of Water, the images were so bright, so robust. I don't know how they did it when like you look at so many others, and like talking about James Cameron and his influence on the industry, like he single-handedly, well, he and his team, like I hate just talking about James Cameron where we're talking about the technology, because there's a bunch of incredibly talented visual effects artists behind James Cameron, but James Cameron and his team, essentially they were solely responsible. Avatar was solely responsible for bringing back 3D into theaters. It was like that's amazing. That's amazing that have that level of influence on an industry where you change the entire industry. Where a bunch of films, like terrible examples like Clash of the Titans, that remake that was like post converted to 3D, but to have that level of influence in the industry, like that's unheard of, right?
Well, that's what I want to say. Like as you said, James Cameron and his team revolutionized theaters. And at the time, not every single screen at your local Cineplex would be able to project a 3D image. Like they didn't have the technology. And so a lot of theaters would have like one or two screens showing Avatar in 3D. And essentially the boom afterwards, every single movie screen can now display these types of movies, right?
Yeah.
But going back to that is that James Cameron and the distribution of this movie, like they made sure apparently that every theater showing this movie had the best possible experience. So there were like slightly different technical cut movies, like it's the same movie, but just like done different technically wise. Because one, if it's in 3D, it's going to be darker, so they can bring different levels up to accommodate for that. But if the theater's not going to show it in 3D, we'll give you a different version of the movie that takes that into consideration. And so apparently that was a big thing in the first Avatar. Like I said, every theater was showing the best optimized version of the movie for that particular screen, which I thought was really cool. And now we have a little more homogeny in that all our digital projectors are out there. They're showing 3D. They can do all this fancy stuff. And one of the things that came out since is Peter Jackson doing The Hobbit at a high frame rate. So HFR is kind of like this, not a newer thing, but it was kind of like almost an experiment that has not taken off in the same way as James Cameron's 3D and Avatar. But James Cameron likes the high frame rate enough that he does it in his movie as well. And so here, like, I don't know how you saw this movie, but I went to our local IMAX. It was 3D and high frame rate. I'm paying top dollar to see this movie with all the little technical bells and whistles that I could to get the maximum experience out of it.
Yeah, I didn't see it in IMAX, but we did see it in the 3D, whatever the maximum was. It was like a wraparound screen. So it was like the poor man's IMAX, I guess, at the local Landmark cinemas. But we did see it was high frame rate, which I noticed at the very beginning of the movie. But very quickly, I don't know whether it was because of the filmmaking or whatever, or I don't know, but I didn't notice it as I started watching the movie. Like after the first couple of minutes, it was noticeable, and then the rest of the movie, maybe because the rest of the movie I was so like lost in this crazy world that Cameron had created that I just didn't focus on it. But it wasn't jarring to me like it was with the Hobbit movies.
So like The Hobbit, I remember seeing like high frame rate for the first time in The Hobbit. I was like, it looked kind of weird, but I got into it and I was pretty much fine with it. Avatar: The Way of Water, for what I read earlier, was shot in variable high frame rate. So some scenes are high frame rate, others are not. But generally the entire movie is high frame rate. And what I noticed while watching The Way of Water is that random scenes, be them some action shots or even dialogue shots, were done at 24 frames per second and were jarring when I was watching it, to the point where it took me out of the experience. Yeah. And I'm not sure. I initially thought maybe this is just a problem with my screening here, like a technical problem with the projection. But I Googled it and some people were kind of noticing the same thing. It wasn't I probably let it jar me a little too much, but I was expecting a whole high frame rate, smooth experience. And here we were having, like, it almost looked choppy afterwards. So
I'm going to be honest. I didn't notice that at all. It's entirely possible that same phenomena was happening in our theater, but I did not notice it at all. Like after the first couple minutes, as I kind of adjusted, like I was so lost and focused on the world and like just the spectacle of it. I did not notice the changes in frame rates at all.
Well, this is the thing, is that the world presented on screen here, the story, like it pulls you in. Like what a crazy place this Pandora is. And going back there, my God, like the visuals in this movie were absolutely insane.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but before I went to see this one, I busted out my Blu-ray copy of the original Avatar and I threw it up on screen. I threw it up with my kids because you need to see the first movie first to get the background.
Yeah. And
I was watching it, like the special effects still amazing in that movie. Like they're still held up, but then watching like the new movie, I was like, well, how much further can they take this? Like the characters looked pretty real back then. And like watching this one, I'm like, people online are saying like, this is like just hands down Avatar: The Way of Water is just the single best special effects ever put to screen in the history of cinema. And I'm like,
honestly,
I'm hard pressed to disagree with that. Like it's phenomenal. Like it's amazing. Like people are doing screenshots side by side of some of the same characters from Avatar and Avatar: The Way of Water. And just like, you can see it, the level of detail. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear that the way James Cameron was able to film this movie was that he went to an actual planet called Pandora and filmed actual aliens. Right? If I didn't know any better, it's that engaging and that level of realism that I don't think any movie has quite captured. Like you look at some of the really, really amazing examples, like Planet of the Apes, the Matt Reeves trilogy there. He didn't do the first one, but he did the second two. And like the special effects in those, for the apes there, pretty amazing.
Oh yeah.
Like still, I'm not saying that they don't hold up, but like you look at what's happening in Avatar: The Way of Water, and it's taking things to a whole new level. Things that I don't think people even in the industry realize were possible until James Cameron's crazy visions forced them to make it possible.
Absolutely, without a doubt. It's like it's a visual feast. It really raises the bar.
Yeah.
I did end up going to see, like you mentioned seeing Avatar, bring out the Blu-ray. I have never seen Avatar at home. I watched the movie when in 2009, I think 2 or 3 times in the theater, and I never rewatched it. I never revisited.
Really?
I don't know if the movie was just, it kind of felt like a little mediocre to me. It was like maybe a 3 or 3.5 star film. It was fine, but I was kind of going for the 3D, and it's like I just never saw it again. And then they re-released it in theaters. And this was last fall,
Right.
I believe. I think the movie was slightly remastered. Like, I think some of the visuals were brought up a little bit for that theatrical run. I saw it out in that IMAX 3D. I was blown away. Like, the movie looked so good.
It still holds up.
And the thing is, I was into the movie too. I was just like, this is the same thing for A Way of Water. They are fairly straightforward stories. There's not a lot of depth to it, but I think they do that on purpose as a way to like be able to relate to as many people as possible and like make it an accessible movie. And by this time I was really into Avatar, the story. I was just like, man, I really care about these people. And I'm sitting there in this giant IMAX theater. There's maybe 5 people watching it in the theater. Like, there's not many people going out to see this on like a Sunday afternoon. And it's like, I'm getting a little emotional watching some of this. Like, it was probably a 4.5 star film all of a sudden. And being able to revisit it, I was like, man, yeah, the entire world of Pandora is gorgeous. And here, I mean, The Way of Water, we're sort of, we expand a little bit on the rainforest, but we're going to the water now. It's all underwater. It's on like these, on the coastline of some of these Na'vi villages. And it was just like, I can't wait to see what the next world is.
Yeah. Apparently the next one's going to be fire, and Avatar: The Last Airbender are getting their lawyers ready. They're one element away from a huge lawsuit.
So did you overall like really like first did you think of the first Avatar? Like overall, what did you like the movie a lot? Where does it stand in the pantheon of like great films, or was it more of a visual effects experience?
Yeah, I think I wasn't as hard on it narratively as a lot of other people when it first came out. I think I have it rated 4 out of 5 stars.
So I want to address that for 1 second. There is that the big comparison is like, oh, Avatar is just Fern Gully, which I believe is a 1980s like cartoon about, you know, deforestation in the rainforest. But I'm sitting there thinking, I watch movies all the time, and a lot of them retread similar stories. Like, that's just how the industry works. And I'm not going to really knock it. And a lot of times, if you tell a similar story, you want to innovate a little bit. Well, Avatar is a huge innovation here in the world building.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And just how how the story is told.
Amazing worlds, amazing like world building, and amazing visuals. I don't have a problem with them revisiting similar, like you said, like pulling out tropes that are similar to existing stories like Fern Gully or Pocahontas.
Yeah.
But it does point to one of the issues that I had with the original movie and with the new movie. And that's with, in this day and age and like growing older and being aware of issues with indigenous peoples and issues of cultural appropriation, and wondering where that line is between inspiration and appropriation and portrayals of indigenous peoples, where James Cameron has come out and specifically said that he was drawing on inspiration from North American history of like the colonial period of Europeans coming over and their not so friendly, we'll put it mildly, not so friendly interactions with the indigenous tribes here, indigenous peoples here, especially in recent years. Canada and the U.S. We have our unique kind of historical burdens to bear, but in light of the continued findings of, you know, mass graves from residential schools and having these issues brought to light, I can't watch these movies without thinking about those contexts and reading online reviews of indigenous people, indigenous people who like the movie and who like that, oh, we were getting, you know, like we're finally seeing like inspiration from our cultures up there. And some indigenous people calling for outright boycotts of the film for its, what they would call or what they would label as cultural appropriation, and then the other side of the coin is not involving, having actual indigenous people work on the movie in terms of consulting and storytelling. It's a very complex space. I don't know whether there's a right or wrong answer, because I think James Cameron has come out and said specifically, there's obviously the white savior myth as well, right? Where Jake Sully is, he's a white guy, but he's a human integrating with this native tribe, or this indigenous tribe. And I think the way James Cameron had explained it, I was reading an interview with, it was an indigenous leader who'd been invited to a screening of the first movie. And I think James Cameron had explained it as, like the humans / who were stand-ins for the white Europeans, we created the problem. So it was his way of almost like, Western Europeans / humans created this problem. So he wanted the Western Europeans / humans to help with a solution to the problem. So I think James Cameron's approach to, that historical influence of his indigenous peoples, I think it's well-intentioned and well-meaning. However, just because it's well-intentioned doesn't necessarily mean that it's not problematic. I know I kind of went off on a tangent here. This is something I wanted to discuss at some point in the podcast, because it's something you can't really ignore. But I think, to me, that's why these movies, is watching them, like, something doesn't quite, I can get lost in the world and I can appreciate them, but part of me in the back of my brain is thinking, what are indigenous people thinking across the world? What are indigenous people from across the world thinking watching this, and like kind of the issues that's bringing up? So that's for me why they're not quite perfect movies, although I would say that I really enjoyed them. I'm not saying that you can't watch these with a critical eye and still enjoy them. You can watch them and be aware of these issues. And I think from my point of view, for clarification, I'm a white man, Western European descent, living in Canada, living in North America. So I have to acknowledge also that my opinion is not the be all and end all. And my opinion is probably, like we are potentially, maybe unintentionally, perpetuating some of these problematic elements. So I think we have to acknowledge that as well. But I know this is, I suddenly brought the whole conversation really, really serious. We were having a lighthearted conversation about blue space cat people. But you did ask.
I don't remember what I asked originally, but I did come across this when I was going through some reviews. I saw one that gave the movie a half star and said, I'm giving this movie a half star because James Cameron has still not apologized for his statements to a specific people, North American indigenous people, that I can't remember the exact specifics because I was going through it quickly. I'm like, I was completely unaware. And I guess he did say some potentially offensive things. He did say some offensive things. And I think you said it before. It's like the meaning was maybe not necessarily malicious, but like it wasn't really said properly. And there was some there was some boycotts called for by the indigenous people of North America, at least, to boycott the first Avatar and the entire franchise. And it doesn't get any press at all. Like this random review I came across on Letterboxd was like the first time I saw this.
I know exactly what you're talking about, those comments that were made, which I think came off obviously offensive, but I think James Cameron's well-intentioned. I think if you look at the way he portrays the indigenous Na'vi people, they're the heroes of the story, obviously. They're clearly the protagonists. I think he has some well-intentioned respect for indigenous peoples, but to what degree he straddles that line between inspiration and appropriation, I think that's not a call that you or I can make as white men. I think that's a conversation that needs to be had among indigenous peoples to help kind of define that more clearly and weigh in on that. So I'm not gonna tread into that territory myself. But I think the other part of the problematic portrayal is there seems to be this almost like this romantic view of like a primitive indigenous society, which again might not be representative. Or I think when people think of indigenous, they think of like, they're primitive or backwards, whereas like indigenous people still exist today in modern society and modern life. They're not living in loincloths out in the woods in the wilderness, right? There's this weird romanticized version of indigeneity that could also be seen as problematic. Again, as a white person watching this, I don't think I still enjoyed the movie, and maybe I'm part of the problem then. It's entirely possible. But I think it's possible to watch it with that critical eye and have those conversations and step things forward. Because I think even on this movie, they didn't have full Indigenous consultation, but a couple of the key actors, I think Cliff Curtis is specifically of Maori descent. And I think one of the kids was played by a Maori actor as well, which is not to say that, it's like the whole like, oh yeah, one of my friends is black kind of thing. It's not to say that having a couple Indigenous actors or people of Indigenous descent play those characters and have that be able to collaborate creatively absolves them of any criticism. But I will say, I think that that's, a positive step forward, that they are starting to include people of background, because obviously the water people were inspired by the Maori people and Polynesian tribes as well. So they are starting to, like, there are still a bunch of white people playing Indigenous people on this, like Indigenous aliens, but they are starting to have more representation among the cast. So I think, like any progress, it's slow and steady, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but maybe I think I heard that James Cameron was thinking about stepping away or handing the reins over to another director for 4 and 5 and any other sequels that come along. So that maybe that's a conversation to be had where it's like, oh, maybe if you want to continue the story, maybe that's the point where you hand it over to an Indigenous director and let them take the reins and start to tell their stories. And maybe that's how you transition and move forward. Maybe that's the progress to make.
And basically going back to what you're saying, it's like, it can make it is a mark when you're enjoying the movie, because you can't feel too guilty for actually enjoying the movie for what it is, but bringing that awareness to it is important. And I think for each of us, exploring a lot of Indigenous cinema is a big stepping stone for us. That it was like, we talked about, I don't even know if we published this episode yet, but Prey.
Oh yeah.
Had like a huge Indigenous crew, all the actors. It was just like, it was a huge step forward.
Amber Mid Thunder. She's got to be more stuff. Amazing.
Going out and watching a movie like Slashback last year.
Blood Quantum from a couple of years back.
Blood Quantum, exactly. It's just like, we got to elevate a lot of those movies and like bring forward their art and having their place here. And it's just like...
That being said too, I think again, Cameron's view, like the way that Cameron portrays the Indigenous peoples, the Na'vi, I think it's really well intentioned, right? It's like these movies are obviously anti-imperialist, obviously anti-colonial, right? The colonists and the imperialists, like it's so clear cut that they're the bad guys and the Indigenous peoples are the good guys. And whether or not that there's probably problematic representations in the movie, the inspiration, like you can't divorce this from real world context completely. Yeah. But I think like it's well intentioned enough where if you're watching this, to me, it's like, yeah, there's an obvious anti-imperialist, anti-colonial message here that I think is positive, that I think is at least moving the conversation in the right direction, even if you're watching this and you don't like the representation of Indigenous people, or you think it's cultural appropriation. And I think intent only goes so far. I know that, but I think if you're looking at it, to me anyway, it was pretty clear. Like, yeah, the Indigenous people were the good guys, and the invaders, the colonists and the imperialists, they were clearly the bad guys. It was like the morality in this is not subtle at all. Well, right?
This is another thing. Like, yeah, the Avatar movies are not subtle. Like the humans, like you just hate them. Like you literally hate humanity after watching The Way of Water. And like there's an entire, like, I swear it's like 15 minutes long of them showing how they, like the whaling scene, how they capture these whales, and all they do is extract some of this brain juice from them, and that's it. And you're like, and I mean, the biologist on there, Jermaine Clement, he's just like, this is all we do with a whale. Like we literally just toss from the side afterwards.
Obvious,
so nasty.
Such an obvious parallel to like the whaling. Like it hasn't gone away entirely, right? Well, like, but they would like capture, like they would hunt down whales for whale oil. They wouldn't use the whole whale, right? Same thing like the hunting buffalo in North America, where the white Europeans would just take the furs or whatever and not use the whole animal, all this kind of thing. Again, not subtle at all. Like you can easily draw real world parallels between the space whalers and real, we're whalers on the moon.
Man, I did enjoy that they gave like the space whales, like they're
intelligent.
They were super intelligent, and it was like I like that aspect of it. Is that we have to respect that species. So it's just like the Na'vi. I mean, the one kid goes out, he makes friends with this lone space whale, and forgive us for not remembering the name of the species, but it's like, no, you can't be friends with that. That space whale is an outcast. He broke the rules of their society. It's just like, he was protecting people. It's just like, it doesn't matter. We have to respect their society, how they do
were
their...
so, like, these space whales were so evolved, and like, I think they said they had like 10 times the synapses and brain like connections in their brains and stuff. It's like, they were so evolved. Like they had this rule, like they were so peaceful. They were pacifist to a fault. Like, we do not kill other sentient life no matter what. And this whale was an outcast because he led an assault against the whalers and tried to fight back against them. So say what you will about pacifism, whether you agree completely with, Gandhi. Was it Gandhi and the passive resistance and that whole thing?
I don't know.
But like, it's an interesting philosophy. It's like to have like, oh, we're so evolved. We've evolved past violence. I mean, that's a crazy ideal to work toward. Obviously, that's an ideal we try to work toward. But to have like, have these creatures who look like they're animals but are actually hyper intelligent and who evolve past violence,
and they have speech. They're talking to them, like they understand.
They have language and music and arts.
And then here's the kicker. The final hour of the movie is this massive action sequence. Yeah. And our outlaw space whale, what does he do? He comes in, saves the day. He breaches on top of this boat, crushes people to death. He's causing mayhem and destruction. They launch like a rocket at him. He deflects it. It shoots off, kills a bunch of other people. And I want to jump up in my chair and pump my fist, say, yes, space whale, do your thing. But it's like, no, man, he's killing again. The other space whales do not approve of this.
Yeah, and I think we're put on their side, but like, we're put in the context. This is an American-made action movie. Yeah. Of course, violence is gonna save the day. And like, honestly, in the context of a movie, it's exciting to see up on screen. Like, but do I take that rhetoric to heart? Like in real life, absolutely not. Violence does not solve problems. But again, I think the movie was making a point about like, it's okay to fight if you're being attacked. Like self-defense, I think, is always, even people who argue for like pacifism and passive resistance, I think there's a clear kind of moral boundary where like, it's okay to fight back in terms of like self-defense. If you're fighting to save yourself or somebody else, I think that's morally justifiable. But of course, it's an American, action movie. Of course, violence is going to be the answer in the end, right? And of course, like viscerally, it gets you up in your seat cheering because violence is exciting to watch. People sitting at a table negotiating for peace. It doesn't make for a great movie unless you're a Martin Scorsese or a Chris Nolan. I guess you could pull that off. But James Cameron, he's giving the people what they want, and he's trying to, like, the movie. It didn't feel calculated, but I think obviously James Cameron felt that pressure of how can you not feel that pressure of having, two of the highest grossing movies of all time and sitting on top of that chart of highest grossing movies of all time? And that being like, that's his claim to fame of making great movies, but also really popular, really crowd pleasing spectacles that pull in big bucks.
Oh, that's it. At the end of the day,
that's a huge level of pressure that James Cameron has to feel. And I don't think this movie doesn't feel calculated, but it's obviously, it was constructed in a way that was going to be accessible to as many different people as possible and families and different people of all ages. And like, I feel, as much as I don't like to get into discussions about how much movies make, and because people always conflate, popularity and box office with quality. But I'm so glad all these haters online, not haters of Avatar in general, but just like general haters, who are like going, who's watching these Avatar movies, right? Who's gonna watch this stupid movie? Who's watching the original movie? Like, Literally, like everybody and their grandma was watching. Like, did you forget? It was the highest grossing movie of all time for many years.
Modern box office now has like the MCU and DCU like cults fully active. And
Star Wars, yeah.
Star Wars, it's like the MCU was nothing at the time of Avatar. It was 2008 with Iron Man, a couple movies after that, but it was not a huge franchise. DC like was nothing. Star Wars was still dead. Like Avatar,
and even the MCU took what 10 years to get to break to get to Endgame and break that record. Like,
and it's kind of funny because we talk about this frequently on the podcast. Is that I am cheering for a new franchise to emerge out of Avatar and like bring something different to the table, right? It's like 100%. I'm really tired of the Marvel aesthetic and the DCU chaos. That's like, oh, I love that. Like James Cameron is bringing like a singular vision and really exploring these different worlds, and like he's taking care with the spectacle of cinema. It's like these are movies that I think you have to see in the theater. Like you just have to go see it on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, James Cameron is doing what George Lucas originally did, where he was taking inspiration from, from his youth and from other like historical, obviously taking inspiration from history and cinema, all these different sources, and creating something or innovating something new and different. Instead of, problem I have with Star Wars now and the MCU now is that they seem to be more products rather than pieces of art, where it's like, oh, it's a franchise now and we have to, go back and fix plot holes and do all this stuff. And we have to worry about canon. And like right now, Avatar is in the first phases of the storytelling, where it's just like, we want to tell, we're putting these stories out and we're going to see, are people going to watch them? And we're just trying to make movies now. We're not worried about canon. We're not worried about tie-in novels. We're not worried about having to watch 3 different TV shows. And
it exists only in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's the starting of the storytelling phase where it's very, very, very pure. But yeah, I'm so glad that something that's not like, as a longtime Star Wars fan, I'm just like, I have to agree with Kylo Ren. Like, let the past die. Kill it if you have to. Star Wars is good, but things are only good when they're finite, right? I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here.
Well, let's shift the gears a little bit here. I mean, this is the beginning of a franchise, and I think there's some, I don't know if it's criticism or just comments on the movie, that it is a bit of an introduction into the greater world, because we know we're getting multiple movies now. But I gotta say, I love the world building that happened in this, the little hints, the fact that they are, like, they cloned the commander guy from the first movie into a Na'vi body. Like, he's not an Avatar. Like, he is literally this different construct now. They have this technology. It's not...
Yeah, Colonel Quaritch and his whole crew there.
Yeah, it's not celebrated, and it's not gone into any great detail. It's just, boom, yeah, we can basically clone people now. And that's just something that may be explored later down the line, but I love that stuff.
Yeah, the ethics of that too, right?
I loved as well that it's like, they couldn't get the metal, right? They couldn't get unobtainium. Maybe they found somewhere else to get it. I don't know, but they don't seem to be going after that. But they're like, the Earth is dying, and we got to relocate here. And there's a picture of the city they've established, and it's just like this gross looking giant gray blob, like
very industrial. Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, like really, like it's inevitable that the Na'vi are basically going to lose their world as humans come further and further in. But you don't see much of it. You just saw like one establishing shot of the city, and then a couple scenes inside, and then we're back out into the rainforest to take on this revenge story. Did the revenge plot like work for you? It was like Quaritch, like he was just gunning for Jake Sully the entire time, right? It was just like, it didn't seem like he really had the backing of any other like military organization. It's just like, yeah, you gotta go take care of this guy.
It was interesting because the whole motivation was that Jake Sully and his wife Neytiri, they were essentially leading the rebellion of the Na'vi, fighting back against the colonial forces of Earth who were arriving. And so essentially, like, the reason they brought Quaritch and his team back, like they had like the consciousness back up, and they put it just before the final fight in Avatar. They kind of, I don't know if they retconned it or if this was always there, if it was always James Cameron's intent. But it was just before the final fight in Avatar, so like they had essentially all their memories up until their deaths. But the whole motivation was, let's if we kill Jake Sully and Neytiri, the leaders of the rebellion, the key rebellion anyway, then like the rebellion falls apart. You cut off the head, and then the body dies, kind of thing. Like it falls apart. They lose a figurehead. Yeah. So that's the original motivation. Quaritch is on board. Is like, sure, I want to get revenge against them too, because he realizes that Neytiri was the one who killed him or killed the original Quaritch, because he's having there's a little bit of exploration of this Quaritch avatar dude, like kind of wrestling with the fact that he's not Quaritch, but like, and he's in this alien body, but like he is Quaritch, and like there is some wrestling with that. But I think he gets a little bit obsessed, right? And I don't think it's unintentional that you have whales in there calling back to Moby Dick, and Quaritch is a little bit of an Ahab where, like Jake Sully and Neytiri, essentially to save the tribe, they pack up their family and they leave because they're the ones with the biggest targets on their back. So they figure, we'll leave. The humans won't be as they'll figure like the leaders are gone, so they're not going to be hunting the tribe that to the same extent. But Quaritch really takes it personal. It seems like he goes a little bit off the reservation, to coin a phrase, where he's hunting down Jake Sully and Neytiri, even though they're gone, they're out of the picture. It seems like it's very, very personal, right? Where he wants to get back, not just to Jake Sully, but also like Neytiri was the one who, if you watch the first movie and he realizes this, she was the one who fired the arrows that actually killed him at the end. So he part of him wants revenge for his quote unquote death as well, right? And you see the lengths he's going to, where he's burning down villages and he's starting to kill the whales and their children, and leaving the corpses on the surface, because he knows it's going to bring the Na'vi in to try and fight back against them. So is Quaritch the Quaritch avatar character? I think he was better than the first movie. I think there's still a lot of space for him left to grow, but I think all the characters, like even though Jake Sully and Neytiri were a little bit sidelined by their kids in this movie, and Quaritch didn't get the screen time that he got in the first movie, I think even with the limited screen time, all those characters felt a lot better developed and a lot deeper in terms of their motivation and everything. So yeah, I think not perfect, but better than the first movie.
I honestly thought they might kill Jake Sully off in this movie, and if not this movie, maybe the second one, because he has all these kids. And the third one, the second sequel.
I think that's what they're building up to, right?
It's just like, because this has to be a multi-generational storyline that they're going with, and part of it, part of the big theme is that the energy is only borrowed, right? You have to give your energy back.
What is in this movie? One life ends, another begins.
Yeah.
That idea of, I think that's not unique to Avatar, but there was something kind of neat about the way that was expressed, right? Where did you watch The Good Place?
Yes.
TV show. Where at the end, like Chidi's speech about, like human beings are like life. It's like a wave where like water takes that form for a while, but eventually goes back out into the ocean. I think it's based on Buddhist philosophy. That idea of like, we're part of a larger system. We're part of a larger force where we're, I'm going to get sued by Lucasfilm here, but we're part of a larger kind of network, a part of a larger, life is a bigger thing than any one individual. Yeah, that interconnectedness between all living things. I think that's not new, but it's always kind of, I think that's an important message to reinforce, especially, again, not subtle, the environmentalist message that is baked into the movie as well. I think it's well known. James Cameron is huge into environmentalism, and especially specific to water, which is why he based this movie in water. Like, I think some of the reason that it took 13 years to get this movie is because he's been with his other hobby, which is
the deep sea exploration. Yeah.
Deep sea exploration. That's what I'm looking for. Like actually in subs going down. I think he was filming the Marianas Trench and everything.
Yeah.
Potentially might show up in one of the future movies, but it's undeniable as well. Like the themes of environmentalism, which I think are important, may seem obvious, but when you look at the mistakes we're still making and the climate change, the human caused climate change, I think the time for subtlety is past. So people are like, oh, it's this really blatant environmentalist message with the whales and everything. Yeah, but people are not getting the point when we've been subtle for the past half a century. We need to beat people over the head with the message, right? So I think that's maybe it's a sign of the times where maybe James Cameron and other people are getting fed up, is like, we need to do something now.
Yeah. So I pulled out a quote just from Wikipedia, because that's the about the extent of the research I do for the podcast.
Sounds about right.
James Cameron stated, "I don't want anybody whining about length when they sit and binge watch television for 8 hours. I've watched my kids sit and do 5 one-hour episodes in a row. Here's the big social paradigm shift that has to happen. It's okay to get up and go pee." This movie clocks in at about 3 hours and 12 minutes.
Yeah.
I think he's calling for the return of like the intermission from like the back of the 40s and 50s, or on those, like Ben-Hur and stuff would have, 2001 Space Odyssey would have intermissions to give people a little break here.
Heck, even, was it Death Proof and...
yeah. The Grindhouse, Tarantino and Rodriguez combo.
Robert
there.
Rodriguez and Tarantino. They had like an actual intermission and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think people are always having this stupid debate online, and I'm sorry for using such strong language here, but it's stupid.
It's
like
children, cover your ears.
Movies should only be maximum like 90 minutes to 2 hours. People are like, no, we need epic 4-hour movies, and other people who I think have it right. Movies need to be exactly as long as they need to be to tell the story that the filmmakers are trying to tell. If it needs to be 3 hours, as long as the movie's good and it's still engaging, I don't care if it's 3 or 4 or 5 hours. I don't care if it's 30 minutes, as long as it fits the movie, like as long as it fits the story and it's not just like filler scenes. Yeah, the movie needs to be as long as it needs to be. And that 3 hours and 20 minutes or 3.5 hours, that flew by. I didn't even know that the end of the movie was coming up.
Unfortunately, the person sitting in the row in front of me during this viewing would bring out their watch every so often. It's one of these smart watches that lights up, is like active. So I could see the time. About every half hour, he was checking his watch, and I could see the time marching on. And it was like, oh, we're 2 hours into this movie. We have another hour left. And it's like, I was kind of cognizant of that. And I'm thinking there was, and let me backtrack a bit here. I will give Cameron a pass in Avatar here for making the movie a bit longer than it really needed to be, for him to really like let the audience soak in, absorb all the scenery, all the world.
Pun intended.
Right? When they're just exploring the underwater reefs and stuff, and like they're just focusing on a character, like taking in the nature. That's me. That's us, the audience. We're taking that in, and we need to see that, because I think it's important for the story that you have that emotional connection to the world, and the characters aren't necessarily super deep. And I think with the spectacle of it all, I want to see stuff like this on the big screen. When I was a kid, you would go to an IMAX, and the IMAX then was like 5-6 story tall screens, and it was all nature documentaries, right?
They had electricity back when you were a kid?
Oddly enough.
I thought it was just like cave paintings on walls.
And back then it was all nature documentaries. It was like a helicopter flying through the Grand Canyon in IMAX, and you're like, ooh.
I remember those.
You know what I mean?
I would get vertigo watching those. Like they were so real. In the IMAX theater, it was crazy.
And so when I watch Avatar, and he's on these massive screens, I want to spend time taking in the scenery. And with the digital effects the way they are, it's mind-boggling. Like, it's beautiful. You truly are transported to another world. And I loved, honestly, every second of it.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest points of this movie, like, this is Avatar: The Way of Water is pure spectacle. This is a movie, when they talk about movies being made for the big screen, they're talking about movies like Avatar: The Way of Water, and the sheer spectacle of it. Like, art has so many different functions, and one of those functions is escapism. And if you're looking for escapism, like Avatar: The Way of Water, 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, no notes for the escapism quality. And like I loved it. I loved just watching these characters swim around. There was entire, I don't even know how long, that must have been like half an hour's worth or like an hour's worth of just characters swimming along and meeting new sea creatures and exploring new flora and fauna. And I was loving every minute of it. Like the water environments in this movie on screen, just amazing. Like, I don't know if it's technically defined as photorealistic. I don't know how much further you can push it. Probably more. I don't have the technical background. But watching these, even just characters swim around and, do their water dance with the giant space whale, I was captivated. I was loving, like, it looks so amazing, and the spectacle of the whole thing, the way it was shot, like, it's not just that it was all this magical space world that James Cameron had created, but the framing of the shots and the cinematography and the angles, like, you could follow everything so perfectly, even when, like, the action, I think we've talked about this with other modern action movies where everything's so choppy and you can't really tell, like, there's no sense of directionality or sense of weight to the action that's going on in this movie. Yeah, and CG can tend to feel a little weightless as well, but, like, these characters felt real, like the physics all felt real enough that my brain, when these imaginary creatures on screen were like punching each other or swimming in the water, my brain never once told me, it's like, oh, you're not watching something real, or the physics is all wrong on this.
I think that speaks to some of the motion capture stuff, because they spent a year and a half developing the underwater motion capture. So a lot of the actors were there, and I've heard interviews with James Cameron where he's not creating full digital characters. Like, every character on screen, it does have an actor's performance behind it, which I think lends a lot to that weight of it. And I mean, obviously, to expand on what you're saying there, like the creatures that, like, the sea creatures and stuff. I mean, we don't have real animals like this, but they do feel weighty in this film. Like, there must be some physicality behind them when they're filming this to make them interactive that way.
They did the research. The physics engines in this movie, it's unreal. Like, nothing feels like it's out of place. And there's one character in the movie named Spider. He's a human character. And somebody had made the point online, I'm not going to take credit for this, but there was like, oh, it's almost like it's flipped, where you used to have like Gollum and Jar Jar Binks were like the token CGI characters, and now you have like, oh, it's a token human character in with all the other CGI creatures. But I think one of the reasons that Spider was in there, besides from the storytelling point of view, where it was revealed that he was actually Colonel Quaritch's son, and so there's that dynamic going on between him and the reborn Quaritch, but also to show like I think it was just like James Cameron kind of flexing, but also showing the audience like because Spider was interacting with this completely digital environment and all these CG characters, and it was like, if you're gonna say something was seamless, like, that was pretty seamless. Like, you could not tell.
There's this quote from a YouTuber, film critic, essayist I follow, Patrick Willems. Watching the scenes where a live action human is running around the jungle with big blue aliens, and I know the world is digital and the aliens are digital, but I can't see a single seam. And that's basically it, right? It's just like, it really is seamless. Like, you can't tell what's green screen, what's not. Everything looks perfect, and it's kind of scary.
There's I was watching Corridor Digital VFX Artist React as I want to do, and twice now they looked at this scene from a trailer from Avatar: Way of Water, where it's just like Jake Sully and he's in the water. He's on this. It's a scene in the movie where he's having to learn how to ride this sea creature, and it's just like a close up of his hand, Avatar's hand, right? Wrapping the leather strap around it in the water, and they're watching it, trying to break down. It's like, is this a practical shot, or is it CG? Yeah. And they're going through, and at the end of it, it's like, after both times, because it was changed in the trailer versus the movie. Yeah. And even after, it was like, like, we haven't seen behind the scenes, so like they think that this is the one in the movie was actually CG, and the one in the trailer might have been an actual real shot that they based the template on. But like, it was so close and so many things going on. Like, they're not even sure if it was actually CG or practical or a blend of the two. Yeah. Like, it's coming down to, like, it's that developed and that refined to the point where even not just the human eye, but trained human eyes in the industry are having difficulty distinguishing between real and the imagined, like that's one of the huge drawing points for the movie. One of the huge selling points for the movie, rather, the spectacle, the CG, and the world building. It really does pull you in. My kids, I keep trying to get them to watch movies with me, especially my son, who has a mild case of ADHD. And to get him to sit for 2-3 hours, very, very difficult. I think with Avatar: The Way of Water, I think my son had 2 bathroom breaks, and the rest of the time his eyes were glued to the screen. My daughter, she's a teenager now, and she tries to I don't like watching movies, whatever. I looked over at her. She was watching the whole time, 3+ hours, kept the whole family engaged. It's an amazing experience. If you get the chance, definitely highly recommend. See this on the big screen. See it in 3D if you can. Would you recommend? I haven't seen it in IMAX 3D. Would you recommend IMAX 3D?
Well, it's all basically probably the same thing. It's just like you see it on the big screen in 3D. You're getting the full experience.
That was good. You passed the test. You're not an IMAX show. That's good.
Yeah. So listen, we got to get to our ratings at some point here. What are you giving this out of 5 stars?
Okay, I think after careful consideration, I think I find myself liking Avatar: The Way of Water more than the original Avatar. So my ranking is somewhere in the 4 to 4.5 star range. Probably going to end up on 4.5.
Yeah.
Purely for the story wasn't as deep as I would have cared for, but in terms of just sheer spectacle, the ability to transport me to a completely different world and to feel like I've gone on a journey after watching what's up on the screen. Yeah, it's just, there are very few films that I've watched, especially in recent years, that I've felt that, where I felt that same kind of spectacle that I felt as a kid watching something like Star Wars, where I felt really where I've transported to an entirely new world and engaged for 3+ hours. To be engaged that long, any movie, it takes real skill in terms of storytelling, not just narratively, but visually. And I think Avatar: Way of Water once again demonstrates that James Cameron understands the language of cinema, that is visual storytelling. Very few people can compare to James Cameron. I guess the proof is in the pudding. I'm not one to tout box office numbers, but if you're looking at just sheer accessibility and sheer number of people who are going to see this movie, the box office tells that story. This is a story that, what do they call it? A 4-quadrant movie. It hits pretty much every demographic. Everybody from every walk of life seems to be watching this. Yeah, it's a great experience, amazing experience. One of those kind of once in a lifetime, but one of those experiences in a movie that or experiences in a theater that don't come around that often. That's my spiel. What's your rating on this bad boy?
I ended up at 4 stars on Way of Water. I think I rated the first Avatar just slightly higher, simply because I think I was able to emotionally connect with it a bit more in The Way of Water.
Okay.
You want to talk about the spectacle and all that stuff. I mean, this was just pure cinema. Like, it was just, just 5 out of 5 there.
Cue the Martin Scorsese meme. This is cinema.
This is cinema, right? Does Scorsese approve of Avatar more so than in his distaste for the superhero genre? And I would certainly think so. I mean, this is...
I'd be curious, because I know that he is really... There was an interview recently where he really loved Tar.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen his comments on Avatar. I don't know.
Well, Tar was... Yeah, that's a movie too. That's an actor's movie right there.
It's a different beast.
Yeah. But, any other thoughts on the movie before we close out here?
Are you going to be picking this up on physical media when it comes out, Brian?
That's a good question, and I have to go back to my statement a while ago where I never watched Avatar at home. I never bought it on Blu-ray, DVD.
So for you, it's a theater experience, right? For you, Avatar at home, it loses some of its luster then.
I don't know. I didn't even give Avatar at home a chance. It just never even occurred to me. Avatar: The Way of Water, I 100% need to see this again. do I only watch Avatar movies in theaters? That doesn't seem fair, but so far that's the streak I'm keeping.
Because I watched Avatar at home. Admittedly, though, like, yeah, it's a bigger screen than I would have watched it back in the day. But like, I don't know, it holds up at home as well. I don't know.
I mean, I think when we get especially into a third and fourth sequel, yeah, you're gonna want to sit at home and rewatch all of them like beforehand. I think this is a really exciting series. I'm glad that it's doing well. I'm glad that James Cameron can put this together and throw it out there. I'm glad that we're getting like a new franchise that feels a little more fresh. There's a lot of stuff to like about it. There's some legitimate criticisms over the movies and even how they're made and what they're depicting. But as a cinema experience, yeah, these things are hands down some of the most exciting things I've seen in the past 20 years.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a whole new generation of furries born from this movie because those Na'vi, I don't know if like the Na'vi, like if they were like 10 or 20% sexier than the first movie.
They just turned up the dial on the computer
animation. When they were like in the water and stuff and some of them were swimming around, like, man, it's like, yeah, like I can't believe I was feeling something inside for these weird blue cat people.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, to be fair, it was like a slightly different, like it was the lighter blue Na'vi who live in the water, like not in the water, but they're on the water. And it's like, they have the movements that the rainforest Na'vi don't necessarily have. So food for thought right there.
Really makes you think, doesn't it?
Oh my God. Well, I wonder if the fire Na'vi will be like in the volcano areas and they're all going to be red or something.
I hope they're not red. I like that they're like different variations of like blue skin. Oh, maybe it makes sense because like you look at humanity and we've got, very different skin tones. So maybe it does make sense to have. It's a bit obvious to have the fire Na'vi be red, but maybe it does make sense to have more variations in skin color. Yeah, across.
At least the rainforest ones weren't green, I guess, and the blue water ones weren't blue. So yeah, it would make sense to keep them all sort of bluish
in the blue range. But I guess from a micro, I guess we have proof of concept on Earth that like microevolutionary changes can lead to drastically different skin tones. So I guess I'm not gonna nitpick the skin color of an imaginary alien race of sexy cat people.